The Zyrath Palace shimmered under the twin suns, its walls made of crystal-like stone that caught the light and fractured it into colors no human eye could fully comprehend. The sprawling city beyond stretched across valleys of glowing flora, rivers that reflected the suns in liquid silver, and towers that bent at impossible angles, defying the laws of physics. It was a world of beauty and danger, and at its heart stood Queen Auralia, the ruler of the Zyrath Empire, who moved like liquid grace across her throne chamber. Her daughter Liara was beside her, standing perfectly straight, her long limbs folding naturally into the regal posture of her people. Liara had always been exceptional, brilliant, strategic, and impossibly beautiful, but she bore a shadowed sorrow that few could understand. Unlike most Zyrath females, she was barren. No child had ever come from her line, and this fact weighed heavily on her mother. In a species that prized continuity and legacy, barrenness was not just personal misfortune, it was a potential political weakness. The palace doors opened with a sound like singing glass, and a human stepped inside, Elias Kane. The humans were rare guests here, delicate and unpredictable in ways the Zyrath did not fully understand. Elias carried himself with an ease that contrasted sharply with the meticulous formality of the palace. His dark hair fell slightly into his eyes, which were bright with curiosity and determination. He moved forward with measured confidence, ignoring the whispers of the court. Queen Auralia's eyes narrowed. Humans were clever, yes, but fragile, emotional, and unpredictable. They were not meant to mingle with the disciplined Zyrath, let alone marry into royalty. And yet, here he was. "Your Highness," Elias said, bowing in the human manner, "I come with a request that may seem unusual." His voice was calm, almost musical in its clarity, and carried a confidence born of certainty. "I wish to marry your daughter, Liara." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Zyrath nobles exchanged quick glances, their long fingers brushing their robes in subtle gestures of shock. Marriage between a human and a Zyrath? Such a thing was unheard of. Queen Auralia's gaze sharpened. "Explain," she said, her voice like steel polished to perfection. "Why should I allow this?" "Humans are fragile. They do not belong in our line of succession, and their biology," she paused, glaring at Elias, "is unpredictable."
Elias did not flinch. "I understand your concern, Your Highness. I am aware of what I am asking."
"But my request is not political. I admire Lyra, not for her position, not for her power, but for her courage, her intellect, and the way she stands in the face of challenge. I wish to share my life with her." Liara, who had stood silently, felt her pulse quicken. The human's words were simple, yet they carried sincerity. She had spent years being a pawn in her mother's political games, meeting suitors from distant worlds who were interested in her title, her wealth, or her genetic legacy. None had ever spoken like this. None had ever spoken to her as if she were simply Liara. The queen's eyes narrowed further. She had expected supplication, bargaining, maybe even fear. But Elias was steady, unwavering, and remarkably human. He did not grovel. He did not attempt to flatter with false promises. Instead, he stood as an equal, not with arrogance, but with determination. "You would place our empire's continuity in the hands of a human?" the queen asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you know what you risk? A human's life is fleeting. Their loyalty is uncertain. Their mind is not conditioned for the complexities of our politics. One misstep, one mistake, and the repercussions." Elias inclined his head. "I understand. And yet, I have lived among your people. I have seen your society and I know the risks, but I also know my own capabilities. I can learn, adapt, and contribute. I can be what Liara needs, not what others demand she deserves." The queen leaned back in her throne, considering. She was a master of strategy, and even she could not ignore the possibility that a human might bring something different, something her rigid society lacked. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they were also inventive, resilient, and stubborn in ways that sometimes surpassed even the most disciplined Xy'raf. Perhaps there was an advantage here. "Very well," she said finally. "If you wish to proceed, there will be conditions. You will live under Xy'raf law, adhere to our customs, and respect the balance of our society. Fail in any of these, and the consequences will be severe." Elias nodded solemnly. "I accept." Liara's heart beat rapidly. She could hardly believe this was happening. She was to marry a human, not for political gain, not for obligation, but because he chose her. The wedding was arranged swiftly. It was a spectacle unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Xy'raf nobles in flowing luminescent robes gathered in the palace hall, while humans were few, carefully selected for the journey. The air was filled with music that resonated in frequencies humans could feel in their bones but not hear with their ears. Liara's dress shimmered like liquid crystal, and Elias wore a ceremonial robe designed for his human form, bright white and patterned with Xy'raf glyphs. When they exchanged vows, Liara noticed something she had not expected. Elias's human hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. He did not falter, did not hesitate, and did not once let her doubt his sincerity. For the first time in years, Liara felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for something larger, something impossible. The ceremony concluded with the Queen's blessing, though her expression remained unreadable. Privately, she feared the consequences of this union. Humans were wild cards, and she was a ruler who valued certainty above all. Yet as she watched her daughter and the human walk together, she could not deny a small part of her mind that wondered, perhaps this was an opportunity, not a threat. In the days that followed, Elias began to learn the ways of the Xy'raf court. He struggled at first, eating food that seemed alive, navigating corridors that bent in ways no human mind should comprehend, and learning the complex social signals that governed the palace. But he adapted. Slowly, methodically, he began to show a capacity for ingenuity and resourcefulness that few Xy'raf had ever witnessed. Lara observed him quietly, noting the subtle ways he altered expectations. A negotiation with visiting dignitaries, which would have ended in stalemate under Xy'raf custom, was resolved by Elias's clear thinking and calm persistence. Where Xy'raf relied on intimidation and ceremony, he relied on logic and empathy. And it worked. The Queen, who observed from her private chamber, felt a mix of admiration and unease. She had underestimated humans, assuming their fragility would be a liability. Instead, this human, not yet fully integrated into their society, was thriving, even influencing her daughter in ways that might alter the empire itself. Late one evening, Liara and Elias walked through the palace gardens, where bioluminescent plants painted the night in shades of green and blue. Elias stopped, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and awe. "Your people's world is incredible," he said. "I have never seen anything like it." Liara smiled faintly. "It is beautiful, yes. But it is also dangerous. The laws, the customs. They are not forgiving, I can learn," Elias said simply. "I already have, and I will continue to learn, if it means being here with you." Liara felt warmth rise in her chest. She had spent so long feeling confined by her own limitations, by the expectations placed upon her, by the shadow of her barrenness. And yet, standing here with him, she felt a sense of possibility she had never known. Perhaps life could surprise her. Perhaps the unexpected could become something extraordinary. The Queen watched from a balcony above, hidden in shadow. She could see the bond forming between her daughter and this human, a bond forged not in duty, but in mutual respect and courage. A part of her wanted to reject it outright, to enforce the rules and ensure tradition remained unbroken. But another part one she rarely admitted even to herself, was curious. Curious about what this union could produce. Curious about what humans were truly capable of. Curious about the future her daughter might carve from the impossible. And so, with the twin suns setting over the palace, casting long shadows across the crystal halls, the queen allowed herself a single thought she would not speak aloud. Perhaps the galaxy had more surprises in store than even she could predict. Liara and Elias, unaware of the storm of thoughts above them, walked hand in hand through the gardens. For the first time, Liara felt like she was choosing her path, not merely following the one dictated by heritage or expectation, and Elias, for his part, was determined to prove that humans were more than fragile, more than temporary visitors. In a vast, alien universe, he would adapt, survive, and maybe, just maybe, thrive in ways no one had imagined. The palace loomed behind them, filled with history, power, and judgment. But out here, among the glowing plants and the quiet hum of the alien night, something new was beginning. A partnership that defied convention, a spark that promised change. And somewhere in the distant future, that spark might just become a fire that could reshape the stars themselves. For now, though, it was enough that they had each other, and that was more than either of them had ever truly expected. The first weeks after the wedding passed like a slow river for Elias Kane. Every day was a lesson, and every moment a test. The Zyrath Palace, while breathtaking, was a labyrinth of rules, hierarchies, and subtle expectations. Servants moved with almost invisible signals. Walls themselves seemed to respond to thought, and the corridors bent in ways that no human could naturally navigate. Even breathing the air felt different, as if the very world demanded respect and awareness. Lyra watched him with quiet fascination. Elias stumbled at first, spilling ceremonial drinks, mispronouncing names, and occasionally misreading social cues. Yet he never faltered in spirit. When a minor diplomatic incident arose, one that could have escalated into tension between rival factions, Elias approached it with a human simplicity that was impossible to ignore. He asked questions, listened to all sides, and suggested solutions that were logical, yet kind. The Zyrath Council was stunned. They had expected him to fail spectacularly, as humans often did when faced with complexity beyond their limited worlds. Yet here he was, turning potential disaster into cautious admiration. The queen watched from a balcony above, her hands folded with a precision only centuries of discipline could instill. She did not trust humans. Not fully. Their resilience and cunning had always been exaggerated in her mind. Yet she could not deny what she had just seen. "He thrives where I expected him to crumble," she murmured, her voice low, almost lost in the hum of the palace. "How?" Lyra smiled at the human's progress, though she did not voice it. There was something about Elias that reminded her of the qualities she herself admired most: persistence, courage, and a stubborn determination to adapt and survive. Where the Zyrath often relied on brute telepathic power and centuries of rigid protocol, humans relied on improvisation and intuition. Elias was proving that, step by step, even the most alien world could be understood through patience and observation. One evening, as the twin suns sank below the horizon, casting long violet shadows across the gardens, Elias approached Liara. He had been silent for some time, studying the bioluminescent flora that pulsed with gentle light. "Your people have an elegance that is almost impossible to describe," he said softly, turning to her. "And yet, there is a rigidity. The laws, the customs, they are so fixed that sometimes I wonder if your people ever question them." Liara considered him carefully. Humans often asked questions the Zyrath would never dare. It was both refreshing and dangerous. "We question, yes, but only within limits," she said. "To step outside those limits is unthinkable. It is dangerous to challenge centuries of tradition." He smiled, a small curve of his lips that seemed almost mischievous. "Sometimes the greatest discoveries come when someone ignores the unthinkable." The words lingered between them. Liara felt a warmth rise in her chest. Humans, fragile, short-lived, and untested, had a kind of courage that the Zeraf, with all their power, often lacked. Elias's confidence was not arrogance. It was a quiet insistence that the impossible might be possible. As the weeks became months, Elias continued to learn. He adapted to the palace's peculiar gravity fields, learned to communicate using the subtle gestures of the Zeraf, and even began to understand the intricate patterns of their telepathy, limited as it was for humans. He made mistakes, yes, but each failure was a lesson, and each lesson brought him closer to integration. One day, a delegation from a nearby star system arrived. They were here to negotiate trade agreements and territorial boundaries, and they expected the usual Zerath dominance, the subtle threat of power, and the unyielding adherence to tradition. Elias observed them quietly before speaking. He noted their body language, their hesitation at certain terms, their underlying fear of the Exirath's unmatched abilities. Then he did something remarkable. He negotiated terms that balanced the interests of all parties without the slightest threat of force. He appealed to logic, fairness, and mutual benefit. The delegation left impressed, praising the Zerath for their diplomacy. But more importantly, they praised the human who had guided the process. Liara watched from the sidelines, her eyes bright. "You did what no Zerath diplomat could do," she whispered, almost to herself. Elias looked at her and shrugged, a small human gesture of modesty. "I just looked at the problem differently. Sometimes, seeing the world through human eyes has its advantages." The Queen, ever observant, had noted the outcome. She was furious and fascinated in equal measure. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but their unpredictability had created a result even she could not ignore. She had always valued control, but Elias Kane had demonstrated something she had not expected. Humans could adapt, improvise, and even thrive in a society designed to confound them. In the quiet of her private chambers, the Queen pondered this. Her daughter's choice, once a source of frustration and doubt, now seemed significant. Perhaps she had underestimated humans all along. Perhaps the rigid traditions of the Zerath were not the only path to strength. One evening, as the stars shimmered in the sky above, Liara and Elias walked along the palace's outer terraces. Below them, the city pulsed with life, a living testament to centuries of power and discipline. "I think they are beginning to respect you," Liara said, her voice soft. "Even the Queen. She watches you closely, though she would never admit it." Elias smiled faintly. "Respect is earned, not given. I do not expect them to understand me fully, but I will adapt. I have to." Liara studied him, marveling at the calm determination in his eyes. "You have a strength I have rarely seen," she said. "Not in Zerath, not in anyone. You endure, you observe, you act, and you never let fear decide for you." He reached out and took her hand. "I have you. That gives me more courage than I ever knew I had." In the months that followed, life settled into a careful rhythm. Elias continued to impress, sometimes inadvertently challenging centuries-old assumptions with simple human reasoning. Liara found herself learning from him too. Where she had once relied solely on training and heritage, she now saw value in flexibility, in choice, and in embracing the unpredictable. The Queen remained ever vigilant, her thoughts a careful balance of suspicion and curiosity. She observed Elias not only for his behavior, but for his effect on Liara. Her daughter seemed lighter, more willing to challenge convention, more willing to dream of possibilities beyond the strictures of their world. It was during one particular council session that Elias's ingenuity truly shone. A territorial dispute between two Zerath clans had reached a stalemate, threatening to escalate into violence. The Queen had expected the usual solutions: intimidation, displays of telepathic dominance, or enforced decrees, but Elias proposed something different. He suggested a trial of skill and intellect, combining elements of both human logic and Zerath tradition. The clans would solve problems together, work in teams, and demonstrate not only strength but strategy. The queen watched, skeptical. Yet the result was astonishing. Rival factions worked together, ideas were exchanged, and respect was earned without a single threat of violence. For the first time, the queen wondered if she had misjudged humans entirely. Their fragility, she realized, was not a weakness. It was a different form of resilience. They survived not by power, but by adaptability. Liara noticed the change in her mother. The queen's gaze was less sharp, more contemplative. There was a new tension in the palace, a quiet shift that suggested something fundamental was happening. Humans, once dismissed as insignificant, were beginning to shape the future of the Zerath in ways no one had predicted. One night, as the palace settled into the quiet hum of alien life, Liara and Elias sat together in the gardens. Bioluminescent petals brushed against their hands, glowing softly. The air was thick with the scents of alien flora, yet comforting in its own strange way. "Do you think they will ever accept me fully?" Elias asked, his voice low. "The queen, the council, your people?" Lyra considered him. "Acceptance is not their way. But respect can be earned, and you have earned it. Even the queen watches you differently now. She is cautious, yes, but also curious. That is progress." Elias smiled, a small curve that carried both hope and determination. Curiosity can be dangerous in a palace like this. Liara laughed softly, perhaps, but it can also change the world. And so, life continued, a careful dance of observation, adaptation, and quiet victories. Elias learned the language of their minds. Liara learned the courage to see beyond tradition, and the queen watched, frozen at times in disbelief, as her carefully constructed empire began to shift in subtle, unanticipated ways. It was not just the marriage that had changed things. It was the human who had entered their world. He was a force unlike any the Xi-Wrath had faced, resilient, clever, unpredictable, and capable of inspiring those around him to see possibilities beyond centuries of rule. And the queen, despite herself, could not ignore the truth. This human, small and fragile in body but vast in courage and mind, might be the key to a future she had never imagined, a future in which her daughter, and perhaps the empire itself, would stand stronger than ever before. As the twin moons rose, casting silver light across the gardens, Liara leaned against Elias, feeling the calm of shared purpose. And somewhere, high in the palace, the queen's mind raced with unspoken possibilities. The human was more than a guest. He was a challenge, a lesson, and perhaps a glimpse of what the Zerath could become if they dared to embrace the impossible. Time passed in a way that was both swift and slow in the Zerath palace. Seasons of glowing flora shifted imperceptibly. Twin suns traced long paths across the sky, and the city's rivers of liquid silver reflected each day in shimmering waves. For Lyra and Elias, the palace had become a home, though still strange and full of unknowns. They moved through the corridors with familiarity now, though outsiders would notice how Elias's human steps were still slightly off from the rhythm of Zerath gravity. It was during one quiet morning in the gardens that Liara noticed something unusual. A faint warmth, a subtle shift in energy that coursed through her body in ways she could not fully explain. She paused, hand on her chest, trying to understand it. For centuries, her line had been barren. Every test, every attempt to predict fertility, had ended in disappointment. And yet, now there was a spark, a sign that something impossible might be happening. At first, she said nothing. She moved through the palace as usual, observing Elias teaching young Zerath cadets the principles of human engineering, guiding them in creative problem-solving that amazed even the most skeptical instructors. She watched him, the human she had married, adapt to the alien ways with patience, intelligence, and courage. She felt admiration, affection, and a strange, deepening hope she could not yet name. Weeks passed, and the feeling within her grew stronger, undeniable. She finally approached Elias in the privacy of their quarters, the bioluminescent walls glowing softly around them. "Elias," she said quietly, "something is different, I feel. Something I have never felt before. It's like a presence, a life, growing inside me." Elias paused, studying her face. For a moment, he said nothing, as if weighing his response carefully. Then he reached out, taking her hands in his. "Lyra, if what I think it is true, then this is extraordinary. We must tell your mother." Liara hesitated. The queen had always been proud, cautious, and demanding of perfection. To reveal a pregnancy, especially in a line long considered barren, was to invite scrutiny, wonder, and perhaps fear. But Elias's calm certainty gave her courage. They went together to the queen's chambers. Aralia sat as always on her throne-like seat, observing the palace below with the careful vigilance of one who ruled not just a people, but an empire. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, lifted when Lyra and Elias approached. "My queen," Lyra began, her voice steady despite the tumult in her chest. "There is news. I am carrying life. I am with child." For a heartbeat, the queen did not speak. Her gaze froze, wide and unblinking. Then her hands tightened on the arms of her seat. "What?" she said, voice low, controlled, but edged with disbelief. "Impossible. That cannot be."
"You barren, and yet you speak of children?" Liara met her mother's eyes, unwavering.
"It is true. Elias and I, we have brought life where none was thought possible." The chamber fell silent. Courtiers exchanged glances, whispers threading through the air like invisible threads. Some looked in awe, others in disbelief, but all sensed the gravity of the moment. The queen stood, her tall form imposing even in the soft glow of her chambers. She approached her daughter, eyes narrowing, scanning Liara as if she might read the truth from her very being. "This child," she said finally, voice measured but trembling slightly, "is not purely Zirath. It carries human blood." Liara nodded. "Yes, and it thrives. I feel it, mother. Strong, alive, and perfect." Aralia froze. She had seen much in her centuries. Wars, betrayals, alliances, but nothing like this. Her daughter's barrenness, once a certainty, had been overturned by the human she had once considered weak and inconsequential. And now, her daughter carried not one, but 2 lives. "You cannot understand what this means," the queen said, her tone a mixture of awe and fear. "This is beyond calculation, beyond prophecy. A hybrid child. It could change the balance of power, the destiny of our species." Alias stepped forward, calm and resolute.
"Your Highness, I understand your concern.
"But this is not a threat. Liara and I will care for this life together, and we will honor your people. This child is proof of the possibilities we have always overlooked." The queen's gaze swept from Elias to Liara and back again. She felt something stir within her, a combination of fear, pride, and an unfamiliar fascination. She had always sought certainty, control, and predictability. Humans offered none of these, yet here, in the most unexpected way, they had produced something miraculous. "I need time," she said finally, turning from them. "Time to consider the consequences of this." Weeks passed, and word of the pregnancy spread quietly through the palace. Some nobles whispered in secrecy, marveling at the impossible miracle. Others worried, seeing the hybrid child as a threat to the rigid structure of Zirath society. Even the queen herself struggled to reconcile her emotions: pride in her daughter's courage, awe at the unexpected miracle, and fear of the unknown. Liara's pregnancy progressed steadily. She felt the children grow within her, their energy vibrant and strong. She would sometimes place her hands on her belly and feel them respond, tiny movements that were startling in their intensity. Elias watched with reverence, often in quiet wonder. "This is beyond anything I imagined," he said one evening as they sat in the garden. "Two lives, thriving in ways no one expected. They are extraordinary." Liara smiled, her eyes bright. "Extraordinary, like you, Elias. You have taught me so much, and now you have helped create something greater than either of us." Meanwhile, the queen could not escape the implications. She walked the palace halls in silence, her mind alive with calculations and possibilities. This child, or these children, represented a fusion of two species, a combination of human adaptability and Xi-Wrath intellect. The potential was immense, but so too was the danger. Some among her council would never accept them, would see the hybrid children as abominations or threats to tradition. And yet, Auralia could not ignore the wonder. She found herself watching her daughter from hidden vantage points, seeing Liara's health, her joy, and the way Elias treated her with respect and care. Humans, she realized, had qualities the Xi-Wrath often lacked: empathy, flexibility, and a determination that was not rooted in centuries of expectation. When the first signs of labor appeared, the palace was filled with tension. Healers and scientists prepared, uncertain how a hybrid child would develop, or what challenges might arise. The queen herself remained at a distance, yet closer than she would have admitted, her mind racing with every possibility. The birth was a marvel. Liara labored with strength and focus, Elias at her side, offering encouragement, care, and unwavering support. The children emerged healthy, their cries a strange mixture of human sound and alien resonance, their eyes reflecting the soft glow of the palace lights, a boy and a girl. Perfect, vibrant, alive. The queen approached cautiously, her hands clasped before her. She had seen many births in her long life, yet none like this. The hybrids radiated an energy that was unfamiliar, potent, and unmistakably powerful. She froze, staring at the children, unable to speak. Liara looked at her mother, a mixture of triumph and hope in her eyes. "Mother, meet your grandchildren." For a moment, the queen could not move. She had been certain her line would end with Lyra's barrenness. She had planned for succession, strategy, and power. And now, here were two lives, tiny but radiant, holding within them the potential to reshape the future. Elias knelt beside Lyra, cradling the children with careful hands. "They are strong," he said softly. "Stronger than we imagined. Their potential is limitless." The queen finally spoke, voice low and trembling with emotion she had not anticipated. I never expected this. Never imagined." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, her pride overcame her fear. She was witnessing a miracle, born of human courage and Xi-Wrath lineage, and she was powerless to contain her awe. Courtiers whispered, some in disbelief, others in admiration. Word of the birth spread quickly, and the implications were enormous. These children were not just hybrids, they were symbols of unity, of possibility, of a future that could combine the strengths of two very different species. As the queen stood frozen, gazing at her grandchildren, she realized something fundamental. Humans were not weak, they were not fragile or fleeting. They were unpredictable, yes, but their adaptability, courage, and creativity had produced something miraculous, something that might change not only her family, but the destiny of the Xi-Wrath Empire itself. Liara and Elias, exhausted but radiant, looked at the queen. In that moment, there was no need for words. The queen's silence spoke volumes. Fear, awe, and wonder intertwined in a single frozen heartbeat. And somewhere deep within her, the queen knew that this was only the beginning. The arrival of the hybrid children had opened a door to a future that no one human or Xyrath could have predicted. A future that would challenge old traditions, test loyalties, and demand courage beyond what she had ever required of her people. For now, though, there was only the quiet miracle of life. The palace glowed softly under the twin suns, and the queen, once rigid and unyielding, watched as the impossible became reality before her eyes. The palace, once a place of quiet routine after the birth of the hybrid twins, had grown tense. Word of Liara's children spread beyond the inner chambers, reaching the ears of conservative nobles who saw the new lives as a threat to tradition and the empire's balance. Whispers of discontent wove through the halls like dark threads, carrying rumors of rebellion and plots against the human who had dared to marry into royalty. Elias observed the change with a steady calm that belied the danger. He had expected challenges, of course, but the depth of resentment surprised even him. Some Xyrath had already begun questioning the queen's judgment, suggesting that allowing a human such influence over the royal line was a mistake. Others saw the hybrid children as unnatural, a disruption of centuries of pure lineage. Liara noticed the unease in her mother as well. The queen, once composed and calculating, now paced her chambers frequently, her mind working through the possibilities of revolt, sabotage, or worse. Yet beneath her anxiety, there was also pride at the miracle of life that her daughter carried, and the human who had helped bring it into existence. One morning, a delegation of conservative nobles requested an audience. They arrived in their ceremonial robes adorned with sigils representing their ancient houses. Their expressions were stern, their movements deliberate, and their tone sharp. "Your Highness," one began, addressing the queen directly, "we must speak of the children. It is unprecedented, unnatural. Allowing a human to father heirs of our line jeopardizes the future of the Xyrath Empire. Tradition must be preserved." The queen, standing tall, her presence radiating authority, listened silently. She had anticipated resistance, but the sheer intensity of their concern was staggering. She could feel the weight of centuries of expectation pressing on her, yet she was not without strategy. "You speak of tradition," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "Yet you forget that survival requires adaptation. The children are healthy, strong, and intelligent. They are a symbol of potential, not weakness. We must not fear what is new simply because it is unfamiliar." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves. The queen's words were commanding, yet there was a subtle tension beneath her tone. She had spoken of acceptance, but the question remained whether her words could contain the rising tide of dissent. Elias stepped forward, his presence quiet but firm. "Your Highness, if I may," he said, addressing the council directly, "the children are not a threat. They represent a bridge between our species, a fusion of human adaptability and Xyrath intelligence. They can thrive in ways we have never imagined. I am committed to protecting them, to ensuring that they grow strong, capable, and respected." There was a pause. Some of the nobles stiffened, unsure whether to respect the human's words or dismiss them. Yet even in their hesitation, a seed of curiosity had been planted. Humans, they realized, possessed qualities that could not be ignored: adaptability, ingenuity, and courage, traits that the Xyrath admired in theory, but rarely saw in practice. The queen, sensing an opportunity, continued, "We will not allow fear to dictate our actions. Those who seek to harm these children will face consequences. The Empire is not weakened by their existence. It is strengthened." Despite her words, the palace guards increased their vigilance. Elias and Liar were acutely aware of the dangers that lurked in shadows. Not all threats were overt. Some were subtle, hidden in whispers, alliances, and the quiet plotting of those who feared change. One night, as the twin moons rose high, A disturbance rippled through the palace. A group of conspirators, cloaked in shadows, attempted to infiltrate the children's quarters. Their aim was clear: to remove the hybrid heirs before they could grow, before they could influence the empire. Elias, ever vigilant, had anticipated such a move. He had spent weeks studying the palace's architecture, learning the patterns of guard rotations, and understanding the weaknesses in security systems. Using a combination of human ingenuity and Liara's insight into Zyrath customs, he had devised a series of safeguards. When the intruders entered, they were met not with brute force, but with calculated obstacles. Hallways shifted subtly, lights flashed in disorienting patterns, and unexpected barriers delayed their progress. The conspirators were skilled, but Elias's preparation was greater. By the time they reached the children's quarters, Elias was ready. With Lara at his side, he confronted the intruders calmly, using logic and strategy rather than aggression. He guided the attackers into containment chambers designed for emergencies, ensuring no harm came to the twins. The Queen arrived moments later, witnessing the scene with a mixture of relief and astonishment. "Human ingenuity," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I had underestimated it again." Elias, panting slightly from the exertion, looked at her and smiled. "Sometimes it's not strength alone that protects life, Your Highness. It's preparation, observation, and the ability to think differently." Liara placed her hand on his arm, pride shining in her eyes. "You saved them. You saved our children. You changed everything tonight." The Queen, though still wary, felt a shift within herself. Humans, she realized more than ever, were not merely fragile creatures. They were capable of remarkable feats. Courage, intelligence, and adaptability could rival even the greatest of Zyrath abilities. In the following days, the palace slowly returned to a cautious calm. The nobles who had plotted against the children were quietly removed from positions of influence, reassigned to distant posts, or absorbed into advisory roles where their threat was minimized. The Queen's authority remained intact, but the balance of power had subtly shifted. Elias continued to teach, guide, and innovate. He introduced ways of thinking that the Zyrath had never considered, methods of diplomacy, strategies for problem-solving, and approaches to technology that combined human creativity with Zyrath precision. His presence was no longer merely tolerated. It was respected. Liara observed these changes with quiet joy. She saw her mother, the Queen, wrestling with a complex mix of pride, fear, and admiration. The rigid ruler, who had once frozen at the idea of a human marriage, now found herself reevaluating what it meant to lead, what it meant to protect her lineage, and what it meant to embrace the unknown. One afternoon, as the children played in the gardens under careful supervision, the Queen approached Liara and Elias. Her expression was unreadable at first, a mask of authority that concealed the whirlwind of emotion beneath. "I have watched," she said slowly, "how you have both acted. You have protected them, guided them, and ensured their survival. And in doing so, you have proven something important. Humans are not what I assumed. Perhaps I have been too rigid in my thinking." Liara smiled softly. "It has not been easy, Mother. But they are strong because we all work together. Because we care." The Queen's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability showing through. "Strength comes in many forms," she said quietly, "and perhaps it is time I acknowledge that human courage is one of them." In the following weeks, the palace adapted to the presence of the hybrid children. Guard protocols were enhanced. Courtiers learned new ways to interact with the twins, and the Empire began to accept the reality of their existence. It was not universal approval. Some still whispered in shadows, but the path forward was becoming clear. Elias and Liara spent their days nurturing the children, teaching them both Zyrath and human ways. and preparing them for a future that would demand courage, wisdom, and adaptability. The twins were astonishingly perceptive, absorbing lessons with a speed and clarity that impressed even the most seasoned teachers. The queen watched from her chambers, frozen at times in awe of the scene. She had expected to be fearful, to see the children as a threat or a disruption. Instead, she found herself admiring their vitality, their potential, and the human ingenuity that had helped bring them into the world and protect them. The Empire was shifting, quietly, but inexorably. The hybrid children represented not only the union of two species, but the possibility of a new era, one where courage, intelligence, and adaptability mattered more than rigid tradition. Humans, the queen realized with a mixture of pride and disbelief, had changed the course of Zyrath history. As the twin suns rose over the palace casting golden light across the city, Liara held the twins close, Elias at her side. The queen observed them silently, a new understanding settling over her. She had once feared the unknown, feared the unpredictability of humans, and feared the consequences of this union. Now she could not deny the truth. Humans were remarkable. And these children, born of courage, love, and ingenuity, were the living proof. The palace, once filled with tension and fear, now held a quiet hope. Alliances would be tested, traditions challenged, and power redefined. But the hybrid children would grow strong. Protected by human intelligence, guided by Zyrath wisdom, and nurtured with love and courage, they were the beginning of a new era. And in that moment, the queen knew something she had never admitted aloud. The humans she had once dismissed were capable of greatness. They were not merely visitors to her empire, they were partners in shaping its future. And the children, radiant and full of life, were the first signs of a brighter, stronger, and more daring world to come. The palace was quiet in the early hours, but tension hummed like electricity in the air. Word had spread beyond the walls about the hybrid children, and while many celebrated the miracle, conservative factions had not given up their fears. Rumors of rebellion had been circulating quietly in distant corners of the empire. Some still whispered that the children were unnatural, dangerous, and a threat to Zyrath tradition. The Queen Aralia was awake, pacing the high chamber corridors. Her eyes reflected the soft light of the twin moons, but they burned with determination. She had always commanded her empire with precision, and now she faced a new challenge: to protect her grandchildren, maintain stability, and redefine the empire's future in the process. Liara and Elias entered the chamber together. The twins nestled safely in Liara's arms. The children were unusually alert, their alien-human hybrid features glowing softly under the moonlight. Their energy was palpable, a mixture of human resilience and Zyrath power. "Mother," Liara said gently, "it is time. We cannot delay any longer. We must show them that the children are part of this empire, that they are the future, not a threat." The queen nodded slowly, her mind already planning. She had resisted the idea for weeks, afraid that openly acknowledging the children would provoke the conservative factions, but she knew Lara was right. Fear had governed too much of her rule, and now courage, human courage, must guide her actions. The royal council was summoned, their seats filling with nobles, advisors, and scholars. The air was heavy with expectation, the whisper of old traditions mixing with the unspoken fear of change. The queen entered last, her presence commanding immediate silence. "My council," she began, her voice resonant and unwavering. "Today we witness something unprecedented. My daughter Liara and her human husband Elias Kane have brought life where none was thought possible. These children," she gestured to the twins, "are heirs not just of blood, but of potential, courage, and unity."
A murmur ran through the chamber.
Some whispered disbelief, others astonishment, but all listened. The queen continued, her gaze moving deliberately across the faces of those who had doubted, those who had plotted. "We have lived for centuries in rigid adherence to tradition. we have feared change. And we have underestimated the qualities of those outside our species. Humans are not weak. They are adaptable, resilient, and capable of feats we have never imagined. The twins stirred in Liara's arms, and the chamber seemed to quiet even further. Their presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. The queen stepped closer, her expression softening.
I was wrong to doubt them. They are not a threat. They are the beginning of a new era.
And I declare that they shall be acknowledged as legitimate heirs of the Xyrath line. Those who seek to oppose them will find that this empire stands united, guided by reason, courage, and vision, not by fear. The room erupted into murmurs, some of defiance, some of awe. The conservative nobles were silent for the first time, realizing the queen's determination was absolute. The humans and the hybrid children could not be dismissed. They were now part of the empire, and their influence would grow. Elias stepped forward, calm and confident. I do not seek power, he said, addressing the council. I only wish to ensure that these children can grow safely and contribute to this empire in ways that will strengthen it. They carry human ingenuity and the wisdom of the Xyrath. Their future can be brighter than ours, alone, if we allow it. A few council members nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. Humans were adaptable, capable of thinking outside the rigid lines of tradition, and now their influence had brought a miracle that could not be ignored. The queen's gaze returned to her daughter. Liara, you have shown strength, courage, and wisdom. You have trusted this human, and together you have created life that is more than either of you alone. Today I acknowledge your children, my grandchildren, publicly and with pride. They shall carry the legacy of our people into a future filled with possibilities. Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes. She had always dreamed of a family, of life beyond duty and tradition, but she had never imagined the queen would embrace her children so fully. Elias squeezed her hand gently, a silent reminder that together they had overcome opposition, fear, and doubt. Outside the council chamber, the palace buzzed with news of the declaration. Citizens and visitors gathered in courtyards, their eyes bright with curiosity. Word spread quickly. The queen had publicly acknowledged the hybrid heirs, and with it, she had reshaped the expectations of the empire. Humans and Xyrath, once wary and distant, now had a shared destiny. In the following days, the queen worked closely with Elias and Liara to integrate the children into the traditions and education of the empire. The twins were astonishingly perceptive, learning human skills from Elias and Xyrath knowledge from tutors. They adapted quickly, displaying intelligence, empathy, and curiosity that amazed even the most experienced scholars. Elias introduced creative methods of learning, blending human problem-solving with Xyrath logic. He encouraged the children to question, to think, and to experiment. Liara watched them flourish, proud of their courage and determination, and often marveled at how human ingenuity had transformed their upbringing. The queen, observing quietly, felt a sense of awe she had rarely experienced. Humans, she realized, were not merely fragile, they were capable of brilliance. And these children, born of human courage and Xyrath power, were living proof of what collaboration, trust, and innovation could achieve. The palace became a center of quiet revolution. Conservatism remained, but the hybrid children had inspired a new generation of leaders, scholars, and innovators who saw the value in courage, adaptability, and unity. Human creativity, once dismissed as weak, now had a respected place in the empire. Liara and Elias spent long hours with the children, exploring the palace, observing alien technology, and discussing ideas for exploration and diplomacy. They encouraged curiosity, allowed questions, and celebrated small achievements. The twins thrived in this environment, their hybrid abilities becoming evident in their problem-solving, their empathy, and their resilience. One afternoon, the queen joined them in the gardens. The twins laughed as they played, their alien features glowing faintly under the light of the twin suns. The queen's stern demeanor softened as she watched them. "You are remarkable," she said quietly. "Not only because of who you are, but because of what you inspire. Courage, curiosity, and unity. These are gifts you bring. Gifts that will shape the future of this empire." The twins looked at her with wide, bright eyes. For the first time, they seemed to sense the magnitude of their place in the world. They were small, but their potential was vast. Elias knelt beside Liara and whispered, "They are the future we dreamed of. Strong, capable, and ready to face whatever comes." Liara smiled, her heart full. "Yes! And they will have the best of both our worlds. Human courage, Zyrath wisdom, and the freedom to grow beyond the limits we once knew." The queen nodded slowly, understanding that her empire had changed irrevocably. She had feared the unknown, resisted human influence, and doubted the union that had brought these children into existence. But now she could see clearly. Fear had been replaced with hope. Doubt had been replaced with admiration. And what had once seemed impossible had become reality. The palace doors opened, and emissaries from distant systems arrived, drawn by the news of the hybrid heirs. They came not with fear, but with curiosity and respect. Diplomacy shifted subtly. Humans were no longer outsiders, and the hybrid children represented a new era of collaboration across species. In council meetings, the queen allowed Elias to advise openly, blending human ingenuity with Zyrath authority. His ideas were tested and adapted, and the results were remarkable. Trade negotiations, conflict resolutions, and technological developments all improved under this combined approach. Liara watched her family thrive, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond pride. They had faced tradition, skepticism, and danger, and emerged stronger. Their love, courage, and determination had reshaped the palace, inspired the people, and protected the next generation. The queen, once rigid and unyielding, now stood beside them, fully acknowledging her grandchildren, embracing the possibilities they represented. She had frozen once in disbelief, but now she embraced hope, courage, and the power of human ingenuity that had transformed her empire. And as the twin suns set, casting golden light across the palace gardens, the future seemed limitless. The hybrid children, small but radiant, played under the watchful eyes of Lyra, Elias, and the queen. Their laughter, curiosity, and energy filled the palace with life and promise. The empire had changed, not through force or decree alone, but through courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to embrace the impossible. Humans had proven themselves not fragile, but formidable in ways the Zyrath had never expected. The queen knew, with quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning. And in that moment, as the palace glowed in the twilight, all three generations, human, Zyrath, and hybrid, stood united. The queen no longer feared the unknown. She welcomed it. For the first time in centuries, the future was bright, unpredictable, and theirs to shape. And the galaxy, vast and full of wonders, had never looked more inviting.